Once again, I arrive fashionably late to the ban list predictions/wants discussion. Well, I am finally here with this, just let's call it a monstrosity. So strap yourselves in because based on the current condition of the TCG ban list and Yu-Gi-Oh, oh boy, there is a lot of work to do. Starting off with the newly banned cards that I'd like to see. First, Gem Knight Seraphonite and Gem Knight Lady Lapis Lazuli. Look, the issue really is, do you ban Brilliant Fusion or do you ban these two cards? And I think Gem Knight players, who really are the only players who matter on this particular issue, would prefer banning the two fusions over taking away Brilliant Fusion. Also, banning Brilliant Fusion does not necessarily eliminate the Lapis Lazuli FTKs that Gem Knights are going to morph into once their new Link Monster core comes out. So the former option has even more perks to it. You kill that annoying high consistency FTK right away. Why ban Seraphonite? Because it should have been banned over a year ago due to the unnecessary advantage that second summons produces, especially now in a Master Rule 4 world. You get a free monster, you get an additional summon, you get to dump a light monster to the graveyard. And the hilarity of Brilliant Fusion in a lot of respects is most people want to make the argument that's one of the reasons Construct got banned. You get that potential dump of a light monster from the deck to the graveyard. Yeah, and we've been seeing that with Brilliant Fusion for over a year now, and it's still at 3? That doesn't make any sense. It's time for Seraphonite to finally get the banhammer. Trickstar Reincarnation. Unless Droll and Lockbird is banned in its place, there really is no reason to keep this card at anything above 0 because Reincarnation is searchable, and you only need one to strip all the cards from the opponent's hand because hey, almost everyone searches during their turn, and that would be the trigger to activate Droll and Lockbird. So the question really comes down to the issue of, is it better for the game if Droll and Lockbird exists or Trickstar Reincarnation? And right now, I favor banning Reincarnation. Some Trickster players may cry foul, but too bad. That's what happens when Konami makes an unnecessarily overpowered card. Go talk to Prophecy players who a lot of their deck is built around a card that should never see the light of day ever again. Last Resort and Master Plan. In my opinion, all of the overpowered Tier 0 aspects of Spiral can be solved by banning these two cards. Master Plan produces far too much advantage. Thank Link Summoning for this one because almost no one was running Master Plan in Spiral decks before Master Rule 4, and in a sense, you could give a little high five assist to Double Helix. While Double Helix makes bringing Master Plan to the field easier, if the aspect of Link Summoning didn't exist, Master Plan would still be a pain in the butt to get off the field because Spirals don't run tribute monsters. Therefore, the overall explosiveness of Spirals would still be somewhat clunky. Last Resort subverts the cost requirement of Sleeper in addition to providing some rather insane levels of unfair protection for the type of monster Sleeper is. If one wants to use Sleeper's effect, there must actually be a cost associated with it. None of this BS Steel Scrap Dragon version 2.0 nonsense where every turn the opponent has a possibility of taking an auto neg 2 at no cost to the Spiral player. The problem with Last Resort is that it should have only been able to be equipped to Super Agent, not any Spiral monster. The existence of this fundamental lack of foresight, or what appears to be so in Last Resort, leads to an interesting side question regarding Konami card design. Do designers purposely make cards like this, knowing that its combination with Sleeper is completely broken? Or is it just a serious lack of knowledge about the general basics of the game? Overall, with these two bans, it could definitely come back to 3 copies, and Spiral Resort would not need to be hit at all, in my opinion. Quick Fix is a little more tricky. I would keep it at 1 for now and see how Spirals fare without Master Plan and without Last Resort. And if Spirals flounder significantly, then one can think about bringing Quick Fix back to 2, maybe even 3 copies. Masterpiece. Do I really have to give reasons for this one? Really? Also, banning the right card this time around, Masterpiece, would allow for the return of all the Draco fighters that were sacrificed in its stead. Draco's not a bad deck if it's got all of its pieces without a Masterpiece. It's still a solid deck. Astrograph Sorcerer. The fact that this card was even created is another what the heck Konami moment. A 2500 attack monster that summons itself when a card is destroyed, no matter what the circumstances of its destruction, and then adds another copy of that destroyed card to your hand. Seriously. Limiting this card is rather irrelevant because it is searchable and only one is needed to jumpstart playmaking in Pendulum Magician. Double Iris. While I was tempted to suggest a ban of Time Star Magician for the same reasons as Last Resort, none of this Beal Scrap Dragon 2.0 BS, I would rather see Double Iris banned. When you think about it, Double Iris is rather crazy. It's a card that lets you search either Pendulum Graph card when it's destroyed, and that happens quite often and in a very controlled fashion for a Pendulum Magician player, and it's searchable. In addition, it's not once per turn. So you can get Double Iris's effect off commonly twice per turn, netting both Pendulum Graphs. Anyone who's played against Pendulum Magician knows how powerful either Pendulum Graph card is, especially Time Pendulum Graph. So why is a card like Monkey Board banned, yet a card like Double Iris still unrestricted when in the structure of their respective decks, Iris is much more powerful. Level Eater. Obvious reasons for this one. Cards that can be special summoned easily at no real cost multiple times in a single turn have to be seriously evaluated for cheapness in a Link Summons world, and Level Eater fails that test miserably. It does nothing but propagate cheap combos that are not healthy for the game. Evenly matched. After dismissing the pointless question of why this card even exists, because unfortunately it does, and we as a community have to deal with it, we ask the legitimate question of why is this card still not banned? There is nothing one can say to justify this card's existence in the meta or in the game in general. Some might try to drag out the tired argument of it punishes overextension, which has always been the calling card for those people who want to try to support, in a sense, those cards that give neg 3, neg 4, neg 5, neg 6s to the opponents off a single card. But the reality is that due to its activation from hand effect and its ability to be activated during the activator's turn, it provides too much free advantage, and after turn 1, it annihilates the opposing player for the simple crime of currently winning the game, for being better than the player that's activating evenly matched, which a card should never do. You should never be punished for being better than the opponent. Now, if it was errata to the point where it could only be activated at the end of the opponent's battle phase and has to be on the field to be activated, then it would be fair and it'd be perfectly fine because your opponent would have more than adequate opportunity to remove it from the field, and you'd have to basically take a lot of damage to the face, more than likely, to effectively get a lot of value out of it. But because the probability that it actually would get errated and errated properly is so small, the best solution is to just ban it. Imperial Order. Yes, some may argue that Imperial Order is not doing much in the meta as a disrupting force, but overall, Imperial Order never should have come back in the first place, even with that joke of an errata. Well, that's the newly banned. How about newly limited? Cyframe Lord Omega. This card should have been limited over a year ago. No more double or triple opening turn Omegas that instantly place the opponent as a huge disadvantage. Due to its return from graveyard ability, only a single Omega is fine. Yes, this may annoy some Cyframe players who feel that the deck lives or dies on getting out multiple Omegas rather early, but the simple reality is that it's the price Cyframe players have to suffer for Konami making this card super generic in the hopes of trying to sell as many packs as possible. It's tough stuff, but it's the way it is, and for the overall health of the game, Cyframe Lord Omega really needs to go to 1. Firewall Dragon. No explanation is really necessary, for in the past I said this should be hit on the September ban list. There are just too many FTK, OTK loops, and the general advantage that can be produced from multiple Firewall Dragons, both proactively during your turn and reactively by bouncing monsters during the opponent's turn, is insane, and multiple Firewall Dragons isn't difficult. If it was hard, if it was like a 5 card combination, then you could explain, oh, well, I guess those times you get it, you deserve it. You can get multiple Firewall Dragons with numerous 2 card combinations. Also, dropping it to 1 where it belongs significantly limits the value of a card like Grinder Gold. Scapegoat. One monster need be mentioned for Scapegoat, although you could mention many more. Scaldy. Activate Scapegoat during the opponent's end phase. Summon a Link Spider during your turn. Summon a Link Karibo. Summon any other monster, and make Scaldy. So from 2 cards, the Scapegoat player nets a 2800 attacker with 3 links, a free special summons from hand, and a +1 from a 4 card top deck selection. Borreload Dragon can also be a problem with regards to easy summoning off of a Scapegoat. Scapegoat's just too powerful, and the problem with Scapegoat, one of the critical issues with Link summoning in general, the idea that you can use tokens at all. Overall, I would really hope Konami has the guts just to say, look, we screwed up, we didn't think about Link summoning thoroughly enough, we're going to change Master Rule 4, you can't use tokens anymore. Because you see what's happening on the OCG list, you're going to see it in the TCG list. There's going to be 5 to 15 cards that their only thing they really do is give you free tokens, and they're on the ban list in some capacity, just because they can be abused in Link summoning. If Konami really wanted to help this game and didn't want to hit a card like Scapegoat, just do the smart thing. Admit the fact that you didn't use enough foresight. It's okay, people make mistakes, companies make mistakes. Go back and say, we're amending Master Rule 4. You can't use tokens in Link summoning. Tokens are just like XZ summoning now. They're not like synchros anymore. It's like XZs. Because, hey, tokens have levels, but I can't use tokens in summoning any XZ monsters. So there is precedence for that. And just that's all you have to do. No more tokens. And then a bunch of cards that are on the ban list or would have eventually had to be put on the ban list don't have to now. Because now you're using them for their intended purposes. Chump blocking and tributing with those tokens rather than, hey, look, I just made a quasi-unbreakable board with 1 card. Thumbs up. Wavering Eyes. Wavering Eyes is one of those cards that should always be at 1 copy. It is a nice advantage producer when you have those specific decks that receive bonus effects when their scales are destroyed, but multiple copies are a definite no-no because it provides too much advantage, most notably against other Pendulum decks, especially those decks that do not get free advantage when their scales are destroyed. And the fact that Wavering Eye searches itself when you destroy 4, which is common against other Pendulum decks, when you activate that first Wavering Eyes, in a multiple copy Wavering Eyes world, multiple turns of Wavering Eyes basically KOs pretty much any other Pendulum deck. How about cards leaving the ban list? Dragon Rulers. Dragon Rulers have always been a sticky wicket of sorts for the community, with some longing for their return, and others remembering the horrors that was Dragon Ruler format and not wanting a repeat. Overall, I feel it's time to allow some of the Dragon Rulers to return to the stage at 1 copy each to test their actual power. I say some because while Tidal, Blaster, and Tempest are fine to test at 1 copy each, I believe the power of Link monsters may have tipped the scale for Redox to the more, yeah, it can't come back because of that, in essence, one-sided Monster Reborn aspect that Redox has going for it. So, sorry, Earth decks, but in my opinion, Redox should probably stay banned, and we can see what Tidal Blaster and Tempest can do in their respective decks. And if they're too destructive, they can just get the Snatch Steal treatment. Next list, right back on the list. And we know for a fact, all of the people who are clamoring for Dragon Rulers, all the people that might not want them back, we know they're either Regeki powerful and they're good at one, or they're Snatch Steal powerful and never again. While I'm not someone who really buys into the memes of free Stratos, if ever there were a time to really bring back Stratos, it seems like this is the time. Heroes have a new Link monster coming out. Heroes now have a new Goblinberg replacement. If you're going to bring back Stratos to try to beef up the hype for Heroes, it seems to be either on this upcoming list or the next list after that. In a sense, if you don't see Stratos come off the list either in one of those two lists, I don't think Stratos will ever come back. Tribe Infecting Virus back to 3 copies because returning it to 1 is rather pointless. To really see if Tribe is a card that can be a disruptive force in the meta, you need to bring it back to 3 copies at first and then reduce copy availability if necessary, because at 1 copy there's just no direct searchability and there's limited special summoning capacity. Very few people are going to run the card at 1, which limits the scope of analyzing its overall power. Testing a card like this at 1 is pointless. Performamage Damage Juggler. Let's bring it back to 3 because Clown Blade's not a legitimate threat anymore, at least theoretically. Maybe someone would prove me wrong if this happened. But right now, what does Damage Juggler really do? It prevents me from maybe getting annihilated by a Chain Burn or a big burn combination that a Trickstar might throw at me, and lets me search another Performamage. Shuret, Strategist of the Necros, return it to 1 copy. I don't think it ever should have been banned in the first place. El Shaddoll Construct, return it to 2 copies. Construct looping is not nearly as powerful as it once was, and the ability to dump a light monster to the graveyard is less impactful within Shaddolls, using Shaddoll Fusion, versus such dumping from a card like Brilliant Fusion, which, as I mentioned earlier, still remains at 3, along with Seraphonite. Granted, if I had my way, that wouldn't be the case. Seraphonite, as mentioned, would be banned, but again, it seems somewhat eyebrow-raising hypocritical to ban Construct for its light dumping, but leave Seraphonite in the game. Wind-Up Carrier, Zemite. If Wind-Up Hunter is banned, of course, because if Wind-Up Hunter isn't banned, then Zemite unfortunately need to stay banned. I know it's unfair. Hunter is definitely the card that should be banned, but that's how it goes. I originally thought Zemite just could go to 3, but that was before Wind-Ups got their new Link monster, so it'd probably be better to take it slow. 1 copy of Zemite back initially and see if the game warrants more copies later. Here's an interesting one. Cold Wave. In a world where actually setting traps is persona non grata, and quick play spells are almost never used during the opponent's turn, everything revolving around continuous traps or monster effects, why is Cold Wave still banned? Cold Wave should be tested at 3 copies. For, like Tribe Infecting Virus, fewer copies would not really do justice to the true power of the card. Yeah, Cold Wave could be a Snatch Steal type situation, but I feel it's time to know. Is Cold Wave really that big of a threat anymore? Super Rejuvenation. Tested out at 2 copies, for there are few dominating dragon decks available. Rejuvenation would help Blue Eyes and Red Eyes, but overall the effects should be minimal based on the way those decks are constructed, and with no level leader in my let's take my list actually happening world, for those ridiculous link boards, large-scale draws are unlikely. Super Polymerization. Let's see what this card can do at 1 copy again. Similar to Stratos, if there's ever a time to see Super Polymerization make a return to the TCG stage, now would be the time in the very near future. Time Seal. No one runs traps, right? Or that's what I'm told. So why is a 1-for-1 tempo trap that actually does punish overextension to a certain extent still on the ban list. Tested out at 3 copies. For Mask of Darkness Time Seal Looping, that's as old as Yatagarazo Locking. Trap Dust Shoot. I have never understood why Mind Crush is at 3 copies and Trap Dust Shoot is at 0 copies when they are rather comparable traps. I'd say 2 copies of Trap Dust Shoot for testing purposes would be warranted. So what changes would there be to the limited list? Cliffort Scout. I feel this card should be one of those rare cards that is semi-limited, not limited. For running Climate Change is really not something Clifforts want to do. Sacrifice. It's time for one of the original Pendulum decks to get another quality card back. Look, as long as Towers remains banned like it should be, then there should be little problem returning Scout to 2 and Sacrifice to 3 copies. Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon. Let's see what this card can do at 2 copies. I think 3 copies would be jumping the gun a bit, but let's bring it back to 2 copies and see what type of power plays it can make. Especially in a Link Summons world. It could be nothing or it could be disastrous. But let's find out. The next ally, Birdman. The combos that landed this guy at 1 copy, at least the currently known ones, are just too slow and inefficient in a modern meta, so I feel it's time for this card to hit 3 copies again. Neospacian Grand Mole. With Eater of Millions, a far superior card, at 3 copies, there is really no reason for this guy to still be limited. 3 copies. Inzektor Hornet. Dragonfly is the problem card of Inzektor. Hornet never should have been limited in the first place. 3 copies. Necros of Brionac. Let the revival of Necros continue by returning their Searcher and quasi-board clearer from time to time to 2 copies. Here comes another potentially controversial one, Deep Sea Diva. If Mullen Glacia were banned, I would not have a problem with Deep Sea Diva going to 3 copies. So why not try that combination out for a format and see if it's a problem? Ban Mullen Glacia and bring up Deep Sea Diva from 1 to 3. Mullen Glacia is one of those cards that really shouldn't exist because it's ridiculously easy to drop, especially in Atlantean Mermaid, and ripping 2 cards from the opponent's hand before he or she even gets to do anything is ridiculously unfair. Spiral Drone. I alluded to it earlier. Bandmaster Plan and Last Resort, and this card can come back to 3 copies, no problem. Ritual Beast Alti Conahawk. Ritual Beast really can't do anything with Alti Conahawk, their key card at 1 copy, with all of the interruption and negation that exists in the meta right now. If you want Ritual Beast ever to have even a chance at being a quality deck again, this needs to come back to 3 copies. Evigishki Mind Auguste. I'm not sure why this card is still limited. If you know, please enlighten me in the comments, for Gust Kraken was the card that created the problem with stripping all of the cards from the opponent's hand. Yeah, Mind could help a little with kind of putting things back into the deck, but not that big of a deal. As long as Gust Kraken remains where it is, I don't know why this card can't come back to 3. Here's another one that some might raise an eyebrow to. 1 for 1. While it could be a snatch steal like Faux Pas, I think we owe it to 1 for 1 to see what it can do at 3 copies, not just 1 copy. Pantheism of the Monarchs. 3 copies. The problem with Monarchs, in my opinion, was always twofold. 1, the fact that they could so easily interrupt during the opponent's turn using Aether's effect or using Stormforth's effect, and to smaller effect, the extra deck shutdown ability of Domain. Taking Pantheism and their general consistency away from them was never the right call, in my opinion. Reinforcement of the Army. Yes, because this card definitely needs to be limited because of all those great warrior decks ruining the meta. I mean, everywhere you go, warrior deck, warrior deck, warrior deck. Oh wait, that's not what's happening at all. The reason this card was limited in the first place was it was the indirect hit to Satellar Knights after they won World. But oddly enough, Satellar Knights never received any direct hits. Altair stays at 3. Deneb stayed at 3. Travers stayed at 3. I guess even to a lesser extent, Deltaros stayed at 3. Nova, 3. But we reduced reinforcement in the army to 1. Take that, Satellar Knights. That made no sense in the first place. Reinforcement of the army needs to come back to 3 copies to see if it actually matters at 3 copies. Another, that's an interesting one you got there, Lewis. Draco Face-Off. With Master Rule 4 hurting Pendulum efficiency, and Pendulum Draco decks being generally viewed as colossally inferior to their true Draco brethren, the question remains, would bringing Face-Off back to 3 be too powerful in combination with a card like Forge of the Two Dracos? Well, we'll never know until we do it. More eyebrow raisers, yay! Monster Gate. Similar to 1-for-1, this could be a mistake, but let's see what Monster Gate can do at 3 copies, because it's not like Reasoning where you get a free special summons. You actually have to give up some form of monster with Monster Gate, even if it is just a token. Book of Moon. Yes, this is the popular one among the community to come back to 3 copies, and certainly makes sense. Definitely a nice defensive tool, but 1-for-1 card applications in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! With little to no offensive follow-up are rarely game-breaking. And as almost everyone has said ad nauseum, it doesn't work against Link monsters. Granted, for the most part, you're going to use Book of Moon in defensive capacity against monsters before the opponent can Link summon, but hey, it doesn't work against Link monsters is a valid point. Emergency Teleport. It's time to see what Emergency Teleport can do at 3 copies. Is its influence in Cosmos still that meaningful? I personally think it would be, but there's a number of people who also don't think it would be. So let's see who's right. Future Fusion. The errata in a lot of respects has destroyed the explosiveness of this card. Let's see how good it is when you can run it at 3 copies instead of 1. Bottomless Trap Hole. Similar to Book of Moon, 1-for-1 card applications that are almost entirely defensive should not be limited, in my opinion, and that's really the critical difference between a card like Bottomless Trap Hole and Torrential Tribute, which is still devastatingly effective, and Torrential nets negatives for the opponent even in non-overextension situations. Seriously, I just never understand the idea that some believe it would be okay to bring Torrential back at multiple copies. Because if I have 1 monster on the field, you have no monsters on your field, and I want to gasp, have the audacity to put a second monster on the field, and you Torrential Tribute me, yeah, that's definitely punishing me for overextension. No, it's not. Bottomless, it's 1-for-1. It can come back. Torrential, heck no. Speaking of 1-for-1s, Ring of Destruction. Similar logic to both Bottomless and Book, along with the errata, eliminating a lot of the cheapness of the card with respect to its effect damage. Let's see what it can do at 3 copies. Oh my gosh, we're just rolling over the 1-for-1 traps now. Compulsory Evacuation Device. Let's see what it can do at 3 copies. True King's Return. As I mentioned before, if you ban Masterpiece like it should be banned, then whammo, True King's Return can come back to 3 again, no problem. And finally, Ojama Trio should go back to 3 because it's another one of those cards that conveniently doesn't have anything about Link summoning in its name. You could get rid of this with Synchros back in the day. Why is this card still at 2? Now with every card being a tuner, including the tokens you just gave your opponent, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for Ojama Trio to remain at 2 copies. So, after that slog, we still have more cards. Oh no, you just said. Well, too bad. What potentially notable cards did I not address? Because there are a number of cards that people might be saying, well, you didn't talk about card X. The first one is Cyberstein. I feel there are 2 important criteria for removing a card from the ban list. 1, is this card too powerful? 2, what deck would benefit from this card's return? And does that benefit supersede the detriment or annoyance factor for the play environment in general? For example, you don't see a lot of people saying, let's bring back Fiber Jar, because Fiber Jar, while not powerful, it certainly fails that second issue. Bringing back fiber jars would be annoying as heck. Such is the issue for Cyberstein. For whether or not Cyberstein is too powerful is questionable. Some would say yes, some would say no, based on the versatility that Cyberstein has with bringing out whatever fusion monster you pretty much want. But the second criterion is the issue. What decks benefit from the return of Cyberstein? Only one type of deck, the sacky, luck-based OTK, quasi-OTK, field control deck that almost no one would ever enjoy playing against. So why would anyone ever want this card to actually come back? Exactly. Stay banned, Cyberstein. Maybe if Konami ever decides to build an archetype around you, then we can talk. Evil Swarm Exciton Knight. I will always be in the camp that this card is unfair and is another one of those cards that just punishes the opponent for winning and outplaying the opponent. Why do we want cards like that in the game? We don't, or at least we shouldn't. Lavavel Chain. Chain is what I like to call a ladder card. It's just a card that will get better and better as more cards that synergize with it are released. I would never remove it from the ban list because if it's ban worthy now, it's just going to get better and better as time goes on. So what makes it less ban worthy then? Trident and Broad Bull. Honestly, I feel either one of these cards could come back to one if the other remained banned, but overall I would prefer both remain banned. However, if forced to make a choice, I'd put Broad Bull at 1. Trident stays banned because I think a lot of people forget that Trident can be a multiple turn disruptor due to the protections provided by other Zodiac cards and just generic protection aspects of a common Zodiac deck. And overall, Broad Bull doesn't screw with the opponent's turn. Harpy's Feather Duster. Want to punish your opponent for setting 4 or 5 back row? Run Danko Sekka or Royal Decree. Duster needs some form of cost to actually be fair. Yeah, the OCG has it at 1 copy, but that doesn't mean the OCG is right to have it at 1 copy. Pot of Avarice. Overall, the game is just too fast. There are too many situations where this card is just a quasi-Pot of Greed that actually extends combinations further than Pot of Greed would itself because of the returning the monsters from the graveyard to the deck. As long as Pot of Desires exists in the game, it's difficult to argue that Avarice should come back using the argument of more generic draw power being needed, and overall, that's the only real argument people who want to bring it back have. Spellbook of Judgment. If I had a clip of someone laughing maniacally, I would insert it here. Kaiser Colosseum. If this card had some form of cost or cold waves activated at the start of the main phase condition, then it could definitely come back. But without those elements, it's just too sacky and cheap. Solemn Judgment. I'm in the camp that Judgment should always remain banned because it's never a bad card. It's too versatile, and there are too many situations where the game completely swings on a single card. So the life point payment is rather muted in its importance. I'll pay 4,000 life points if I can negate something that's going to completely swing the duel. And just 4,000 life points versus winning, yeah, I think I'll take winning. Thank you. Also, Judgment can always be activated, unlike its Solemn Brethren, which have flat life point cost. So even if you're sitting at 100 life points, you can flip this guy over, shut down a key opponent card, and then go on to win the game during your next turn. Artifact Moraltac. This card fits into the Cyberstein box, where there is really no artifact deck per se. There could be one if the deck received more support, but I don't see that happening. So you have to ask the question, will the general environment benefit from the return of Artifact Moraltac to 3 copies or maybe even 2 copies? More than other decks will be hurt or just simply annoyed by its return? Yeah, I'm in the latter camp. I think it just hurts the game for Moraltac to come back to 2 or 3 copies. So Morale, you stay at 1. Now, if Artifact Sanctum was limited in its place and they did a nice swap, Sanctum to 1, Moraltac to 3, then Moraltac can return to 3. I have no problem then. But if you leave Sanctum at 3 and Moraltac at 3, nah, too annoying. Sir and Graph. I wanted to return these cards in the past to semi-limit or even no limit, But that was before they received their new Link monster. So, Sir and Graf, you stay put at 1 because that Link is just too good for you to be anything more than 1. That grass looks greener. I am completely anti-Luxac in my play design, my play strategy, and just my in general play. And grass is pretty much the essence of luck in this game. Personally, I think it should be banned. So in my book, it certainly shouldn't be available at any more copies than 1. Upstart Goblin. Yes, because what this game definitely needs right now is more generic draw power and to be faster than it already is. To quote Homer Simpson, if you couldn't tell, I was being sarcastic. Hand traps. I have said my piece regarding hand traps back in my last Insightful or Foolish. I feel that Tier 1 traps should be errataed in some form, not banned or limited, or remain at 3 copies. And finally, oh my gosh, it's almost over, terraforming. Overall, I just do not really care about whether or not terraforming gets hit. If it does get hit, then that's fine. It's understandable. I can definitely see the value in that hit for Metaverse is certainly a turn slower, and Pathfinder, well, if you're running Pathfinder, you're just, in a sense, desperate. The problem, though, is if you do hit terraforming, you significantly hurt field spell reliant archetype based on how fast the game has become and how many interrupters exist, making non-field spell reliant archetypes like Pendulum Magician and Trickstar, which can search for their field spell within the archetype, that much better. And the question really is how dramatic is that shift going to be? One might never know unless you actually do ban or limit terraforming to 1. The biggest issue I would like to see addressed by Konami in the TCG regarding the ban list, both the upcoming one and all future ban lists, is the idea of testing the power of a card. They seem rather gun-shy about testing cards, which does not make a lot of sense because there is precedent. Raigeki was unbanned, and after an initial bout of complaining and bickering by the player base, there are a number of players that right now don't even run Raigeki in their main decks. The opposite side of the coin has been seen as well when Snatch Steal was unbanned. It wreaked havoc on the meta, was hated by almost all players, but was simply banned on the next list. In the end, the game clearly survived. Of course, testing can only go so far, for clearly there seems to be a rather strong dividing line between two powerful cards, like Pot of Greed and Spellbook of Judgment, that should just stay banned, period, versus cards that are now questionable, like Dragon Rulers, Cold Wave, and Monster Gate. Maybe they're still too powerful, maybe they're not powerful enough anymore. Well, that is my ban list insight video. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.